self-identify. They're not going to say, oh, he was trafficking me. They're not going to give you a name. They're not going to give you a face. They're not going to give you any of that. What we find is that they're probably in our program for about a year before they're even willing to talk to law enforcement. And so
these are residential programs that go during stay.
You mean
like the one in Conroe?
Oh,
it's
yes.
Residential.
Mm-hmm.
And how long do they stay?
Conroe, it's anywhere from 9 to 12 months. It's up to the age 18. I believe they start around the age of 9. However, DFPS can pay for the stay, like through Medicaid and that kind of a thing. Parents can say, I have a survivor, my child is a survivor. They really need treatment, they really need help. There's lots of programs throughout the Houston area that will pay for that child stay if they're not on Medicaid. A child isn't turned away, but there is funding that needs to be found. But they're very good at saying, okay, let me call this organization. Let me call this organization, and pulling together the funding for survivors who don't have the funding for Medicaid or victim services, who don't have the funding that way. But not all of them go to treatment. Not all of them want to go to treatment. Not all parents want to put them in treatment. It's unfortunately more often than not they don't go to any sort of treatment facility. And a lot of parents don't want to send them there. Yeah, you
can't force them.
No.
Been there.
Yeah.
Not me.
No. Yeah.
My child.
DFPS is in charge. However, they can't force them to do
Anything.
certain
Go
things.
anywhere.
Yeah.
Do anything.
Same thing with adoptions and stuff. Kid doesn't want to be adopted by that family. They don't have to be. And so just keeping that in mind, but not to say law enforcement isn't trained, but they do have processes to follow, calling parents, that kind of a thing. If they find that parents aren't the ones trafficking them, then they're released to their parents. However, we need to think about, okay, well that kid might just run away from home again. So it's always good to have that advocate or someone there who's simply there to be there. And we'll go down that road once we get to the portion on common thread. So smuggling is not trafficking. Like I had mentioned earlier, human smuggling is the importation of people into a country via the deliberate invasion of immigration laws. Harboring, transportation, all of those things are included in that. I'm going to skip forward because this breaks it down into a visual. So that trafficking is where it's forced, defrauded, or coerced. It adds the element of a crime against a human being. And then, of course, that need not entail the physical movement of a person. Where that smuggling is the person is consenting, even if it's a parent consenting for a child while they're being smuggled together, whatever it is, there's consent involved. Smuggling is a crime against a country and its borders. Smuggling involves the illegal transportation of an individual across a nation's border. Smuggling is always transnational. So it could also be smuggling of drugs, it can be smuggling of whatever it is. And we're talking about human smuggling, it's different than trafficking. But we do see a lot of murder, rape, abuse, all of those things with our individuals who are being smuggled into the country. So keeping that in mind, and then of course it could be a gateway into trafficking, but they are different. For a while it was all being called smuggling. It was all being called the same thing. There wasn't even trafficking charges until that TVPA came out and identified that there is such thing as trafficking charges, and there's more charges that are being created to charge traffickers with the crimes. What we're seeing right now is that traffickers are being arrested, however their bonds aren't high enough. Their bonds are $15,000. Their bonds are $20,000. And so unfortunately,
It's not enough.
apparently they're not considered enough of a flight risk. Because it really is about safety. The whole bond situation is to make sure that they return to port, right? That how high can we get it to where it's enough for them to return? Apparently they think 15,000 is high enough, but even when you claim bond, it's still only a percentage of what that bond is. And so there's lots of advocacy programs and things out there that are fighting for those bonds to be higher. Because if you're a trafficker, I mean, kiddos can be trafficked multiple times a day. You're earning a couple $100 each time.
So is there anyone we can contact to encourage those bonds to go up?
I haven't seen any legislation around it, not that I can pinpoint off the top of my head, as far as directing at that, but I know that the more recognition we're seeing in the news articles going out about what the bonds are, there's a lot more recognition in needing to hire bonds, but really it's up to that judge. That judge is the one who really.
We could be like mad and sit in the courtroom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Angry. Yeah, for
Brothers
sure.
against brothers.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure there's like a non-government group.
There's non-government groups for everything.
Yeah, that's the only
so
thing I
sure.
can think of that would,
Yeah.
when they look out there and they see
Mhm.
whatever symbol you have, you know, whatever that symbol is,
Yep.
and they know they're elected, and,
I know Bikers Against Trafficking is a
oh
very big
yeah,
one.
I rode with some of them.
They're amazing.
Baca.
Yes.
And
And
they
you
like,
have the Bikers Against Child Abuse and
Yeah,
the
okay.
Bikers Against Trafficking
Okay.
specifically.
Different.
Isn't there
So-
truckers also?
Truckers Against Trafficking, absolutely. I'm part of all of those Facebook groups. But the Bikers Against Trafficking, I didn't even know existed. We hosted community training. I shared it to one of those big groups. And then he was from Florida, and he's like, I just want more information. And I'm like, do you have a Houston chapter? Like, can we, like, you know, an amazing work that they do around it is it's awesome. And of course, the Bikers Against Child Abuse, I've seen them go into courts and
Oh,
give
they're-
kids
and
their
they're
little
the-
cuts and all
oh,
the
and they're
things.
usually the biggest, burliest,
I think it's
tattooed,
Yes.
guys, and they just stand there.
They come to the coalition
Ain't
events
messing with
and they'll
him,
walk
yeah.
in and you're like, whoa.
Carrying a teddy bear usually. And
Yeah.
Dude.
Yeah, so lots of different groups, but I know they do a lot of showing up to court and
Mhm.
advocating that way, is what I will say. The Bikers Against Trafficking, I think the only branch they have in Texas is in San Antonio. I'm like, y'all need a branch in Houston. One day, but super amazing organization if you haven't looked up them before either. They're super great. But moving on, so how are children trafficked? Some children are abducted, and forced into involuntary servitude of sex trafficking. So that's typically what we think of, right? We think of taken. We think of someone just like being forced into a car, being picked up at the mall. Moms are super, hanging on to their 2-year-olds. And as you should do that, not saying that you shouldn't. However, that's what people are thinking is happening. They're not thinking of the relationship that's being built, the coercion. They're not thinking of that. They're thinking of someone just being picked up at the mall. They're thinking from a taxi, from an Uber. Not that it isn't happening, but more often than not, it's someone they know. It's a friend. It's a family member. It's someone that's just in the neighborhood. It's someone that you recognize as a friendly face. And so some children are sold by their parents. This is familiar trafficking. Again, I have so many moms who's like, I can never imagine. How can anybody do that? Well, there's lots of addiction issues. As we see in foster care and adoption, parents have a lot of addiction issues. And so unfortunately that addiction leads the way. And so there's a super great video, I think it was put out by Unbound, and it kind of shows that. It shows where a mom and a daughter out front, a lady was like on the wrong street or whatever on the phone. She sees the guy go in, she sees the mom say, hey, get in there, to her daughter, and she's like, what is happening? And she calls the trafficking hotline. And so it's just a depiction of how parents, unfortunately, in order to get drugs, in order to put food on the table, whatever it may be, or just that control, right? Maybe they were trafficking themselves in the beginning, and then it ended up leading to the children because of control. That one seems to always get everybody. And to me, when the foster care system, I'm like, well, that makes sense. To me, that makes sense, but to a lot of people, they can't imagine. I don't have kids. I don't have an addiction issue either. So there's lots of things that it's hard to understand if you haven't experienced it. Not saying that's okay, of course, but there are reasons behind it, unfortunately. It's difficult for children to protect themselves from these scenarios. Like we mentioned, lots of coercion and things like that, but we'll keep going. Recruitment. When children are recruited in trafficking scenarios, they often know and trust the trafficker. We mentioned this. We mentioned how it can be a friend, a cheerleader on the cheerleading team. It can be older individuals, older gentlemen. It can be friends, teachers. Unfortunately, I hate to say that. There was a teacher in Waco who most recently, I think probably about a year ago, was trying to sell 2 of her students online. And of course, we're looking at bad apples, right? We're not saying teachers are wonderful, amazing educators, not trying to discredit that way, but unfortunately it does happen. Another conference that I attended, it was a youth whose parents were working day and night. They were pastors, they had to do some part-time jobs in the evening. Her parents were leaving her with a teacher at night when they would work at night. And so that teacher was trafficking her at night, taking her to school to live with her the next day. And so her parents didn't believe her when she finally came out and told them. Did not believe her. But at the same time, you're like, well, this is a teacher that we've trusted. And so this is the whole part of like not believing a survivor of domestic violence, of sexual abuse, of all of those things. And so her parents didn't believe her for a long time until it finally came out another kiddo was happening to them. Those parents decided to believe that child. And it came out, and of course parents felt horrible. But she was telling her story and she's rekindled with her family, which is amazing. I would find that to be very hard to do. But if you're not educated in how it all works and you trust those people in the community that are supposed to be safe, not saying we need to be, so restrictive of not letting our kids go to school or whatever it is, but just keeping an eye on some of those things that pop up as indicators. And we'll get into what that looks like as we keep going. So fraud. Victims may be lured into trafficking in these possible scenarios. We mentioned that romantic relationship, that promising of independence. This is a big one for kids in foster care. Promising that independence. They've spent how many years in foster care where DFPS is telling them where they're going, when they're going there. You're going to go stay with this foster family. You're going to go to this school. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. You're going to participate in this program, that program, all of those things. That is the big one for our youth in foster care. Saying, I'll get you your own car. I'll get you your own job. You don't have to finish school. I don't know why they're trying to make you do that. I'll take care of you. Okay, well then they run away from their foster family. That's all nice and dandy until they realize what that job is. And so that's a big one. And of course, promising money, material goods they would not otherwise have. That's also a big one. Mom said no to that Louis Vuitton purse. How could she? I'll buy it for you. And going in that way. So that's that fraud. Victims who have insecure attachments and a challenging emotional bond with primary caregiver at heightened risk. So I don't usually go super in-depth around attachment because I believe you guys cover it in y'all's training. So I'm not going to go too in-depth with it, but you can have a secure attachment and you can have an insecure attachment. Insecure attachment can be broken down into, I think, 3 or 4 different categories, depending on how that caregiver responded to you as a child. Consistent, inconsistently, angry, maybe you were afraid, sometimes providing care for you, sometimes not. All of that is around that attachment. An individual must attach to a primary caregiver in order to form that attachment. And it can be any primary caregiver, right? But as we see in foster care, kiddos have a hard time attaching because they're being ripped away from their parents. That's breaking an attachment there. Well, then they're forming a relationship with this foster parent, then something happens with that. So then they're on to the next foster parent, or they're put in a treatment center, whatever it is. So challenging attachment bonds is a driving force there. Attachment vulnerabilities are all of these things. And so with this, I usually, these things make a child more vulnerable and essentially have attachment issues. And so most kiddos in foster care can check off most of these, every single one for some kiddos in foster care. And so just recognizing that all of this puts our kiddos at risk for it. Because traffickers prey on that need for love. If you don't feel like your parents love you, don't feel like your foster parents love you, well, a trafficker comes in to meet that need for love. So children with a secure attachment often believe that the world is a safe place. Oh shoot, I always think there's one last bulletin. The world is a safe place. They can count on adults to meet their needs. If they have a problem, there are people who can help them with it. Their choices make a difference. They matter. If they try hard enough, they can accomplish things that will bring them success. Children who have developed that secure attachment believe these things about the world. Where's the problem in this? They think they can count on adults. They think the world is a safe place. Is where I always find the issue. because
Nobody
this is
could
where,
do something that bad. Nobody could do something that bad.
right,
Yeah.
we're sheltering our children from the dangers of the world, right? I don't want to talk to my kids about sexual abuse or sex or about any of those things, about how do you have that conversation with your kids? How do you do that? You know? And so I was having this conversation with my aunt who has, I believe she's almost 4 now. She's like, she goes to daycare and stuff, and I'm always like, I trust my daycare, but you never know. She's like, how am I supposed to have conversations with my 4-year-olds about her body parts and how no one is supposed to be touching them and whatnot? And I'm like, I don't have a kid. I can't tell you that. However, there is children's books that you can buy. And of course, I found them and I sent them to her that basically say your no-no areas. And it's also very good to not to use vulgar words, but it's also very good to use the appropriate words for what they are as well. You can say no-no areas and stuff like that, but they do need to understand what those parts are actually called, because if an adult uses that term, they may not even know what that is. And so I can't be of great help because I'm not a parent, so why am I going to give advice on that? However, there are a bunch of books that people can buy for children's books for that. Same thing so what's funny about this part of teaching kids and being a safe place and all of that, the TEA actually says that the component of every grade level, K through 12, needs to be on trafficking. Each year, teachers are supposed to be teaching one little component of it. However, have we ever seen that happen? Have any kids being actually taught that? It's a regulation. It's not being enforced. You don't have to use the word trafficking when we're talking to our younger kiddos, but how much safer would it be if we actually did that component in our schooling? You know, I'm not saying teachers need to parent, but it's one little component that takes 30 minutes. And so, I didn't know that. I recently attended a conference where I found out that TEA had put that in place, it just wasn't being enforced in school districts. And so I'm like, that's amazing. We know that teachers have to take a trafficking training. But again, you know, is that a video online? We've all taken those DFPS trainings. Literally, you click through, unless you really care to sit there and look at them. Like, unfortunately, if it's like that, how much are you really grasping? You know? And so, it's just interesting the things that we try to put in place that aren't enforced, that can really help our kiddos. So children with an insecure attachment, caregivers will not be helpful. People are untrustworthy. People are not trustworthy. I need to meet my own needs. My choices don't affect anyone else. They are insignificant without value. They are small and powerless. No one can love me. Again, I clicked too much. So oftentimes we hear this from our kiddos in foster care, right? We hear them say, no one loves me, no one cares about me. Our older kiddos, I need to take care of myself. I am powerless because the state of Texas is always telling me what to do. Foster parents always telling me what to do.
You're repeating my last case. Everything.
Yes. I mean, in general, I feel like kids are like, I'm tired of you telling me what to do. I remember being a teenager, but it's even more so when there's another entity involved outside of parents. And so just keeping this in mind as to why traffickers prey on that need for love. So because attachment challenged children feel unloved, they become more vulnerable to traffickers and less able to disarm safe and unsafe people. They aren't able to distinguish the difference.
And even if they do, it's hard for them to figure out where to go, who to rely on.
Who to rely on, absolutely.
Well, and like she was saying earlier, some of these traffickers, they'll spend months, but some will spend up to 2 years grooming. And then all of a sudden, after 2 years, switch.
Absolutely.
She called them all her boyfriends.
Yep. The girls at Freedom Place, like I mentioned in Conroe, I'm going to go back to my boyfriend when I get out of here. Can I call him? He's going to come pick me up. They can't leave, but I mean, you know, how things work in those centers. Like, people will throw things over the fence, cell phones, those kinds of things. And it's in a remote location. It's out there. First time I drove there, it was like dark, and I'm like, where am I going? like, and so, unfortunately, it takes, because, I mean, admitting that you're being trafficked and taken advantage of, then you have to start your journey of healing, and that's what's hard. So, a lot of them will return to the trafficker multiple times. Girls in our program, boys in our program, they're still trafficking themselves, they're still involved with their trafficker. You can stay in our program, they're still in the life, but it takes a couple years unless they come around to it much faster. Some do, some come around much faster. However, the problem is with that too is maybe you made $100 for 2 hours of work. How much do you make at McDonald's or a minimum wage job? Very hard to make that switch, especially if you're an adult, over 18, you're not in foster care, whatever it is, it's hard. It's very hard. And so my goal right now, in addition to training, trafficking, and things like that, is finding job programs, CNA programs, phlebotomist programs, welding programs, whatever it is, those trades, cosmetology programs, and funding for them to get into one of those trades, because that's a trade that you can control how much money you make as if you hustle, right? And so definitely looking into programs and things like that for our youth that we work with, but it's hard. It's hard.
And they don't always accept.
Yeah.
No.
No. And when we get more into what our program does, it's definitely more so relationship focused. We do case management, but that's not what our focus is, because we want to be able to be that consistent adult who's a safe person, who introduces them to safe resources, safe people, safe community. And so it has to start somewhere, right? It has to start with that basic need of call me at 2 a.m. and I will talk you through it. Okay, you want to return to your trafficker, or you want to move here with your trafficker? Let's talk about how you're going to be safe in doing that, and figuring out what that plan is. So Recruitment Tactics, befriending the youth online, befriending youth who are outcast at school, targeting runaways from youth at shelters, bus stations, or on the streets. Traffickers will sit outside of substance abuse treatment centers, psychiatric hospitals, and recruitment to target on that need. Sounds crazy, but it happens. For anybody who went to a treatment facility or whatnot, doesn't have anyone there to pick them up, walks out front, hey, you need a ride? And so that's one way. The other one I like to always note is our online, befriending the youth online. That's a big one. Anything that has a chat feature, whether it's work with friends, whether it's a Disney game, whatever it is, anything that has a chat feature. It's getting to the point where it's like, well, I don't know anything about Facebook. I don't know anything about Instagram, Snapchat. Parents are saying this. I know nothing about it. It's your job to know. Unfortunately, it is your job to know. Whether you like technology or not, it's your job to know. Because anything that has a chat feature, anything. I'm a grown adult on Words with Friends. If I'm playing, I can receive a message from someone, and I have. So imagine our youth who are like, oh, this person said hi to me. They said I was beautiful from my little photo. And so just keeping that in mind. Tons of parental safety, Life 360, all these things can control your kid's phone from your phone. You don't even have to be in the same place. And so it's not good enough anymore to say that, well, I don't really do technology. Well, you have to.
It's also
Unfortunately.
important to know, as a person who did this at one point, there's like these apps that like can hide on your phone. And
Calculator apps, note apps.
That's it's bad, but like at the same time, they know how to do it. Your parents don't necessarily know. And
Well,
so
they're like, oh, look, there's calculator.
yeah.
Swipe.
She must be doing math.
Girl.
But yeah, there's apps to disguise where you can save photos, where you can save messaging, disguise to something else, all of that. You can
You're killing us,
Google,
okay? You're killing us.
you can Google like, I think it's, what's the organization? Crime Stoppers Houston. I think every week they highlight a new app that says, I think it's Crime Stoppers Houston, I'm not sure. It may be another organization.
I get them on Facebook,
Mhm.
little photos, and just like, I didn't even know all those apps.
Yeah.
And
It
I
changes.
literally just got out of high school,
Mhm.
like, it's kind of
Yeah.
crazy how much they grow.
Yep. exactly. It changes so quickly. And I've realized that, and I'm like, oh, I'm not young anymore. Like, I used to think I was, like, I'm a millennial, but at the same time, I'm like, these apps, I don't know what that is. I'm still on Facebook, and I shouldn't be, according to Gen Z. So, but anyways, targeting online is a big one, especially during COVID. We saw a rise in that during COVID because people weren't going out in the communities. They weren't being targeted at parks and things like that were closed. So the online recruitment, the pornography, all of that stuff was, there was an increase in that online. And I'm sure as we saw with foster care and things, immediately that the pandemic started, we were worried about child abuse reporting, right? We're worried about it actually being reported because who's seeing these kids? And so it's the same thing with trafficking. It just shifted to online. And so something else I always like to kind of throw out there, which I will send you guys an email if you want to share their emails. I always send out just a list of movies and things to watch, a list of resources if you want more information, ways to talk about your kids to trafficking, organizations to look at. But the other one that I like to always note is there's an app called Trafficking is what it's called. And let's say your husband travels for business, maybe you guys just travel out as individuals. What you do is you go into the app, let's say you check in at Marriott, whatever it is, Hyatt, whatever it could be, and you put where you're staying, the address, you take pictures of the room, and it goes into a database. And so I'm not great with technology, but essentially if there's a kid online, the photos were taken in this room, it will match the two photos.
Say that again, because I'm not understanding.
So let's say I'm traveling to Dallas. So I'm staying at the Hyatt in Dallas. I check into Dallas, I pull out my phone. There's an app on my phone called Trafficking. It asks for the Trafficking, CAM.
Oh, so you're helping.
Yes.
I got you.
Yes, sorry.
I'm trying to think.
I shifted. There's good apps too, people. Yes, good apps too. And so you check into your hotel, and essentially what I'll do is I'll say I'm at this hotel, this address.
Okay, I got you.
I don't think it asks for your room. It asks for the floor, and then from there you take pictures of the room. And so I might actually have the app on my phone, but
And then it can identify.
And then when
Other
that picture
photos
shows up with the kid in the room.
right.
Yeah.
Oh,
So in our
this is
hidden
really
ads,
good.
like Backpage, those kinds of things, or
Yeah.
Craigslist, whatever it is, it can pull those two photos together and identify that as a place of where trafficking had occurred.
Wow.
Artificial intelligence.
It's amazing. But you said you're in IT, didn't you? But yes, so super amazing way to use technology that way. I think it's amazing in that sense because it's always hard to know, and oftentimes we think of hotels like, the Palace Inn, or we think of all these other, Motel 6. We think of like that, but it's higher end hotels too.
They're gonna go to the sleazier ones. Trying to
Yeah.
save money.
That's what she's
Yeah.
saying, but it's not necessarily.
It's not always that way.
Rent by the hour.
Yeah, Motel 6.
It's not always that way. You can pay off a manager of a hotel. You can pay off all of those things. The hotel industry is doing a lot of work. There's organizations specifically surrounded around educating them and traffickers and how you need to be aware, because if you're allowing it to happen in your establishment, then you can be held liable too. You can't just look the other way. And so another conference where it was like an owner of something, she was on the board or something, she was talking about how in their chain of hotels what they're doing. And so, which is super amazing, but a lot more can be done when it comes to
Doing
that.
it in Airbnbs as well.
So I know,
That's a little sketchy now that I think about it. And how,
well, yeah, a lot of
I
people.
don't know, I feel like it's safe, Airbnb, I mean, they quiz you so much.
It was like, I literally just booked an Airbnb.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
It is very intense, and I mean, I think, I haven't heard anything in regards to Airbnb
feel like it's
being
less than
used
not.
I hear
as,
more about Uber and things like that.
Right.
I never heard
Yeah,
about
yeah.
Airbnb.
which
stuff.
even Uber and Lyft and those things, they have education for their drivers and everything like that. Really what the issue is that I've been out where I needed an Uber, right? Let's say Shenanigans, for example. I've had an Uber driver pull up there when I was in college with a different license plate. Hey, are you Ashley? Bye.
Yeah.
I'm not getting in your car. I don't care if you drove your wife's car that night. That's the issue. It's that we're not matching. Uber's very good. Picture, color of vehicle, type of vehicle, license
In
plate.
Houston, I went to
So-
a place in Houston, and it didn't happen to us, but like, there's just so many people, and everyone needs an Uber there. So like, just, there's so many cars that you
somebody
just
gets in the
never
wrong,
get
yeah,
in.
yeah.
Get in the wrong one. Yeah. So.
Figuring it out.
I know that in San Antonio, our organization has tried to get in and train Uber and things like that, but they did their own internal movement of training and evaluating drivers and things. Not saying it doesn't happen with Uber drivers and things like that, because it does. People can post as those things. I would say taxi drivers are probably more so of an issue. Because oftentimes it's like you're waiting for an Uber, no one can be found. Hey, I'm a taxi driver. I know when I was in Mexico, I spent 2 months in Mexico, like a study abroad with Sam, and there's taxi drivers everywhere. No, I still Ubered. Like, to me, that was the safer option, because you can throw a magnet on a car and say you're a taxi driver, and that be what it is. And so, just gotta be careful with our ride sharing, but for sure, just making sure your plate matches the app, right? Trafficking tactics, saying loving words, providing gifts, appearing secure and stable. I think we've reinforced this a lot, so I'm going to keep moving. But of course, providing that basic needs, which is what you had mentioned in regards to shelter, food, clothing. That's what we call survival sex. You're needing food, you need to provide formula for your baby, clothes, shelter, roof over your head. Maybe you need a bed, those kinds of things. Lots of times our kids who run away from foster care are trying to meet those basic needs because they're not being met, obviously, because they're on the streets. So our homeless population, our homeless youth are often being targeted for that survival sex. Traffickers may begin to isolate the child, distancing the child emotionally from parents and friends. That was where I was saying, they're going to make you do your homework, they're going to make you do this. Oh, you have chores, you have a curfew, they're taking away your phone at a certain time. Just reinforcing that natural parenting back and forth around things that kids don't agree with. Being on that kiddo's side. Well, if you were coming to live with me, you would have yourself whatever you want. You can do this, you can do that. In that email I'll send y'all a link to a video called Grooming, and it shows the scenario of that battle between a parent, then end up being trafficked by a boyfriend, and how that could have led that direction. And it was an actual scenario by the actors in the movie. They're from Houston. I've met with the director. She works for another organization. But really good video to just kind of give that idea of how easily it can happen. It's not easy just to say no. Traffickers often are very smart, very manipulative, and keenly aware of particular children's emotions, material vulnerabilities. So I'm going to keep going. I feel like we've pretty much covered this in the sense of it's not easy to say no because of how they get you to that point.